Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well and look forward to the next 30 minutes. There are still a few people joining, but we've got quite a lot to get through in the 30 minutes, and I'm conscious I don't want to keep anybody beyond the 11:30 that we've sort of said we'd finish by. So we'll move on quickly. Just to confirm, we are recording the webinar. We'll make it available for sort of reference after it's finished. Excellent. Okay, so what's the objectives really for today? Really, by the end of the 30 minutes that we're going to spend together, there's really two aims. To provide you with a checklist, a simple checklist of actions that you can take to address the near-term sort of technology risks that remote working and the whole response to COVID is causing, and also at the end, just to provoke some thoughts about how your future business needs to adapt also. Okay, wow, what happened? I mean, I think really for the vast number of our businesses, the road has been fairly rocky. In our experience, we've seen businesses that have transitioned very smoothly, and others that have really struggled, and ultimately there are obviously businesses out there that have actually had to cease trading during the lockdown. So we'll all have had our own experience, and really what I want to just do over the next couple of slides is just to introduce maybe the sort of the stages of recovery, really, as and when they'll start for each different business. Ultimately, our role here at CMI is to help guide you through that recovery journey from a technology perspective, and really to call upon the experience we've got and are gaining through supporting over 250 clients through COVID, through that rush to remote working, and ultimately their transition into what we call a modern workplace, which puts us in a much better position to be able to manage the challenges that this is causing us. Just before I move on, one of the things I want to do over the next series of webinars, which we're going to be running weekly, is maybe just a quick straw poll, just to sort of, I thought it'd be useful for us all to gauge some insight from the attendees, and we've got nearly 40 attendees today from across the client base. How things are moving week to week, how our outlook for our own individual businesses have been. Just very simple, is it better than last week? Is it worse, or is it really the same and hasn't changed? So maybe if I can just launch that poll and just ask you each just to click the relevant button, and then make sure that you submit that down in the bottom corner to make sure that we actually get that back. And what I will do is I'll share that with you at the end of the day. I can see is coming in now. Actually, what's really encouraging is we've got nobody selecting worse, which is actually really encouraging. We've actually got about a third, two-thirds split, so a third are saying better, and about two-thirds about the same. So actually that's really encouraging that things aren't getting worse. I guess maybe the flip side is there are some businesses out there that maybe it can't get any worse. I totally appreciate that. Okay, let me close that poll off now, and as I say, I'll share the results with everybody after this. I just thought it'd be interesting to see how that split changes over the sort of coming weeks and months as we continue through our webinar series. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so to introduce a little bit more now, really what we see as the journey, if I call it that, over the coming months and throughout the rest of this year and into next year, probably for all of our businesses, is what we're really calling sort of the 5 phases that we're all going to need to navigate. Now, you may have slightly different views on this, but at a high level, we see these 5 phases. So resolve, for most of us, we're through that, maybe at the tail end of it in some cases, but this was really about addressing the immediate challenges that COVID-19 presented to ourselves, our staff, clients, etc. So that was really about the rush to remote working and trying to sort of keep the businesses operational where we're able to do so. So as we're moving out of that now, and really this is what the focus of this webinar is on, is about the resilience. So this really is now addressing those near-term risks. We're not looking too far forward at this moment in time, but we're addressing those near-term risks, what we've learned from our own experiences of the resolve phase, and also trying to make our businesses more resilient to be able to absorb these shocks and be better prepared for the future. If the lockdown continues, if it reoccurs at some point later in the year, which of course we really don't know. So that's really going to be the focus of today's session. And then we'll maybe just sort of touch on a little bit towards the end about return, and that's where I want to just ask some questions, maybe just to provoke some thinking about what the future may look like. Now that future is ultimately a little way off, and as I keep saying, is going to be at a different time of the year for different businesses, depending on what you do, what industries we all work in. And then we move on to sort of reimagining, what the next normal, as we call it, the new normal, some are calling it, what that may look like for you, your businesses, and if and how your business is going to need to reinvent itself, either need to, or potentially where there's an opportunity to, which you can take advantage of the opportunity. And then there's a reform aspect to this. So I think it's not going to be surprising to see that there's going to be some government regulation, compliance, competitive shift in the landscape in which our businesses operate from. So those last two, and maybe the third one, the return there, we'll touch on in future series. We have actually got a white paper ebook that we're intending to sort of launch, publish this week, may push out into next week, but we'll give us each a checklist through each of those. So it's something we're working on to try and help our clients, just from a technology perspective, understand how we can move these phases and how we can help you through that journey. Right, so the resolve phase. Really, the intention of this slide is to try and ask you what were your lessons? What have your lessons been? Have you thought about, what went well, what you could do differently next time? As I say, most of us are through that, so the horse to some extent is already bolted. But we've got 4 or 5 things here that we've put down from our experience, that what we saw within the client base that we were supporting, the feedback, the questions we've been getting from clients. I think the first point there ultimately is that there wasn't a single business that I'm aware of, and I'll put CMI into that category, that was 100% prepared. I mean, ultimately, how could we? How could we plan and anticipate what we're going through at the moment? We as a business were reasonably able to transition, because as you'd expect, we'd adopted some of the technology that we encourage our clients to. So we managed to move reasonably seamlessly, but there were still some aspects which we struggled with. People were using desktops in the office because they were permanently office users. Little challenges like that. Clearly the immediate priority was getting people home and working. How easy was that for you? What were the problems? What type of user base, what departments, what applications? These are all questions that really encourage you to be thinking around your own individual experiences, because we need to take those learning points into the resiliency phase. Some of you may be aware of this if you were trying to order new equipment from ourselves. There was a huge backlog in equipment. You can imagine the amount of laptops, webcams, mobile home type, mobile working type devices, that technology that suddenly there was a huge rush for and a huge surge for. So inevitably there was just the inevitable backlog that was caused by that. And compounded, of course, by the fact that a lot of the sort of the technology manufacturing production comes out of China, sort of the Asia region. So they were already suffering because of the lockdowns that had been there earlier this year. So again, just thinking forward, you cannot be expecting that availability of kit is going to be there in the future. So let's preempt that if we need to. From our perspective, this is quite telling for us. This really started for us as a business on 11th of March. And what I mean by that is where we started to really see exponential growth in the sort of the inbound requests for, preparation, remote working, VPN, extra licensing, etc., which is actually, it's a full 10 days. I checked this today. It was 10 days after that the actual formal lockdown happened. Now, I guess the point here is that in those 10 days, there was a lot of businesses that prepared, but you would be amazed how many people didn't prepare. I guess maybe they had their head in the sand until that lockdown. So for us, that rush to remote working really extended over 3, if not 4 weeks. Which of course puts a strain on us, but it's not necessarily about us, but it's just about the fact that that causes issues, inevitable delays trying to get through the mountain of workload and backlog that we need to provide. So preparation, I guess that's what I'm coming down to. The other point that we really did notice was actually how uncoordinated the response was from within the client base. And slow I mentioned there, which is really that 10-day gap I've just referred to. What I mean by uncoordinated is, on that 11th of March, and 11th, 12th, 13th or so, we were getting requests from our client base, but in an uncoordinated manner. We effectively had the user base coming to us, where they, as individuals, had been thinking, I might need to work from home, and preempting the questions, which is great. They were thinking about that. Imagine for ourselves, across 250 clients, but 10, 12,000 users, the burden that causes, but equally, the inefficiency in getting you as clients to move towards remote working. So much so that actually, funnily enough, Friday the 13th of March, Friday the 13th sticks out for obvious reasons. We actually we took the initiative, and some of you may remember we actually had a sort of a call out day, calling all of our primary contacts, requesting that there's more of a coordinated effort around the VPNs, so we could try and work together to get ahead of what was happening. So again, just be a lot more coordinated. That's disaster recovery planning, etc. And the obvious thing, I have to say ultimately, is those businesses that had, I guess, embraced the sort of modern technology, cloud telephony, some of the collaboration tools, that sort of digital transformation banner that gets used a lot. They were the businesses that actually fared a lot better. They made a reasonably seamless transition into remote working, whereas those that hadn't, for whatever reasons, they were the businesses that really struggled. So they were what we saw, and also our experiences. And again, just to recap, the reason for this slide is really I want you to all be thinking about what your experiences was, because those lessons need to be taken forward into the sort of the resiliency stage. So forced and rapid change, which we've all gone through, ultimately equals risk. There is most business projects, whether they're technology or not, have a lot of thought, consideration, planning, risk assessment, put into them to make sure that they deploy effectively, they don't cause issues elsewhere in the business, etc. And clearly, with the rush to remote working, that wasn't the case. We just had to get all of our staff at home working. That was the utmost priority. What obviously has happened through that, there's new risks really, and that's where we've got to just circle back now from a technology perspective and start understanding, what those risks are. Now, I don't intend to go through each of these points here. They're there for you to read, and as I say, we'll share this with you after. But you can see they are categorized and really into those 3 areas: availability, security / compliance, and productivity. So, availability, just to confirm, what we mean there is the availability of your systems, and typically we're talking about, the backup, disaster recovery, aspects of your business. So, we look there, broadly speaking, most businesses were, saving their data and other applications running either on, servers in your office, in the cloud, web-based applications, etc. But the key point is those had been protected or are still protected adequately through backup strategies, processes, systems, tools, etc. What has happened with remote working is everybody's rushed home. People have moved to tools like Teams, Slack, Dropbox, Box in order to be able to share information easily, because maybe it wasn't so easy to share it within the infrastructure that was currently in place. And one of the, as we all know, the nature of human beings is we go down the path of least resistance. And if that path of least resistance was to start using Dropbox or WhatsApp, that's what's happened. So the risk here really being is that there is the potential, and I think it's inevitable, that there will be data being shared by your staff outside of the usual areas and being saved in the locations. And in some cases, they may not even be aware. If they're saving stuff to the desk, in their laptop, they may believe they're actually saving it to maybe a location in the office, but actually maybe they're saving it to to the C drive or somewhere on their desktop. So there will be users out there that actually are inadvertently saving stuff locally. So being able to make sure we protect that properly is really important. Security and compliance, a lot of information there. Now, this really, you can tell by, the fact it takes up nearly 2/3 of the screen there, is the big risk. We've got people using home PCs, working outside the security of the company firewall, using unpatched home machines. Maybe they're not aware of the cybersecurity risks, and I can tell you now there's been a huge spike in the amount of phishing scams, etc., out there that are trying to target this. And even the other day, I just saw an example on, I think it's BBC News sort of website, where the iOS or the Apple, the sort of the native mail application that comes on iPhones, increasingly people have moved to that because they need something, and that was the obvious place to go. But there's actually a security risk that's just been identified with that. So we shouldn't be using things like Mail app. We should be using, the Outlook app on the Apple or the Android, whatever device you have. And then the final section really is around productivity, and we've all seen the headlines around Zoom and Teams, etc. But there is risk really around just a lack of or a reduction in productivity. People not be able to collaborate, people not being able to share files properly. I was talking to a client yesterday, and they're really struggling with the fact that because they're outside of the office, they don't understand actually where their projects are, because they have no way of tracking milestones, and they're not sort of bumping into each other around the corridors, etc. So that's a challenge. Management challenges, both of your people, your teams, but your operations, as I mentioned. So the landscape really is that there is an awful lot of change that's happened that has exposed an awful lot of risk, and it's that risk now that we need to come back to. So just, we understand what resiliency is. I just came across this recently, which I just thought summed up really from a business perspective. Our responsibility now within our businesses is to look at how resilient we can make our businesses, and those businesses that are resilient will be better placed to absorb future shocks, and will come out of it better than the competition. And ultimately, that's the key to survival and ultimately prosperity and growth in the future. So just a sort of an entry point into the importance of this phase. So, our view, again, from a technology perspective, you can apply this elsewhere in other business areas, but a 5-step resiliency plan that we'd suggest you take out of this webinar and start to review and action within your own businesses. So I've already alluded to the fact that you need to really look at your own resolve experience and learn from that. What went well, what didn't go well, what you're aware your competitors did that actually have been good if you'd have been able to do. Who's responsible for learning and applying and implementing those changes? And then moving on and actually looking at those risks, some of which I've just touched on. Conduct a full review of what risks you've got out there. Some you'll have, some you may not know, but just because you're not aware, don't assume you don't have them. That's where we can help you to understand that. And then obviously, as you do normally, prioritize those risks and the mitigation of those. Clearly update business continuity plans. I know we all have them. and detailed. We all pulled them out of the cupboard when we were put into lockdown. So we absolutely have to understand this. If you know, I mentioned earlier about the uncoordinated response. That is a symptom, ultimately, of businesses not having a coordinated, well-documented business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, whatever you want to call it. So that must be taken. Responsibility at board level would be our suggestion. It's that important to do. Look at it. Add your learnings in, responsibilities, and ultimately to make sure we have a coordinated and speedy, responsive response to future issues if they occur. And then identify the technology that will help you improve the resiliency. Now, clearly that's the role that we can help play with. What technology would have made your transition easier? And I'll put the example here just as telephony, for example. There are so many clients that I've spoken to that they've got staff now having to revert to mobile phones and advising clients to contact them on mobile phones or put them forward as two mobile phones on the BT phone system, for example. That's an area where many businesses have struggled with that transition. It's a very easy thing to fix. And ultimately, because of some changes coming down the line with the traditional sort of PSTN network, it's going to need to be fixed anyway, or transition from. So it's an obvious place to start. And I'll cover off some areas around some specific technologies, just so you've got a sort of a reference point in a couple of slides' time. And then, making your wider policies fit for purpose. I talk about the business continuity a moment ago, but policies like, do you have a remote working? What's your bring your own device or BYOD? Some HR, some well-being policies. They don't necessarily all have to be technology related, but it's actually looking at those policies now and are they fit for purpose? Not necessarily just for this moment in time, but for the next new norm that we're going to come to. So I'd suggest to take those 5 steps. I hope they help. And then specifically, a checklist. Again, this isn't exhaustive, and as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be sort of launching this ebook that has a lot more information in there from a checklist perspective for all the different phases that we hope will be of use to you. And again, you can see, remote working, security, and availability. I've just tried to categorize those. So these are really the questions that you should be asking within your business. You should be, asking ourselves. We can help you answer these if you're not aware. That help understand, whether you are exposed to those risks moving forward. So, just as an example, the remote working capability, there's the obvious ones there. Do you have the hardware needed? I touched on earlier on, people that were always office-based users, typically, working from desktops. Now, again, many people move those desktops home, but not everybody has the space at home necessarily to do that. That's a hassle to do that. You've got to take the monitor with them. It's just cumbersome. It just doesn't work that well. Now, personally, I think this whole COVID thing is the end of the desktop. Historically, people bought desktops because laptops were so expensive. The price differential these days between a desktop and a laptop is immaterial. You might talk, maybe £100 for an equivalent spec, £200 at most. If you compare that to the cost of the disruption and the hassle of moving, it's really a no-brainer. Critical applications, remote working, we've all been through that. It's one thing having access to email, maybe a phone system, etc. But what about the core applications your business uses? Sage, just as an example, is very topical because a lot of businesses use Sage, but maybe you're not aware that Sage is not supported in some of their versions across an internet connection. It's not that it won't work, but there are risks around data corruption to your accounting data. So it's things like that we need to be thinking with and working through with you. Okay, so as I said earlier, really just a final slide really before we move to slightly sort of mid-long-term sort of questions really. Again, not exhaustive, but these are probably the top 7 or 8 services that are available there that either help address some of the risks that we now have within our businesses, or will help make you more resilient and more flexible and more agile for the future. They're in no particular order. They're listed. Cloud telephony we've talked about, Office 365 backup. I talked about data now being in OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams increasingly, but this may surprise you, but Microsoft are not responsible for backing up that data. Microsoft are responsible for the availability of the platform, and will typically save the data or protect the data for 30 days. But if somebody maliciously removes that, accidentally deletes it, anything like that, then that data is gone. They have no responsibility for that, and that's in their terms and conditions. Many people aren't aware of that. Security awareness, phishing simulation. Many of you I know actually already subscribe to that service. DNS web protection, ignore the DNS bit. I mean, ultimately, this is people browsing the web. The web is ripe for hijack, various security threats. When you're browsing the web from within the four walls of your office, you're protected by your company firewall. When your staff are now working from home on their home internet connection, they no longer have that protection, and they don't have the appropriate protection on the PC. So that is a substantial risk. I won't go through everything else there. You can read that, and as I say, you've got that for reference in the future. I guess the key thing here really is that all of these, the cloud telephony is a little bit different, but all of these are literally a couple of pound per month type services. These aren't substantial investments. Certainly when you consider the relative risk reduction that comes as a consequence. So really encourage you to sort of look at those and understand how they can help you address your risk and improve your resiliency. So I hope they're useful, and there's something we can do to help you a little bit later with those as well. So last couple of minutes, let's move on just to really just provoke some thought in your mind, if you're not already doing so, around what the consequences, maybe the sort of the more long-term consequences of this will be to your business. As we come out of resiliency, we're going to start, and as I say here at different times, we are going to start moving to the next phase, which is the return phase. Bringing our businesses back to, I use the word scale quickly there, but just bring them back to pre-COVID business levels prior. So the next norm is very unclear for us, that's for sure. But here's just a sample of questions. These are just examples, just to try and get sort of the juices flowing really for you. But how will this change the expectations of existing staff and future recruits? There's been a lot of talk around what millennials expect of a workplace, a work environment, and flexible working, etc. I really think this has just really accelerated that, but actually broadened it out across the entire workforce potentially. What does that mean? Are future recruits actually going to be asking you what you have in place to provide the flexible working, be able to react to these sorts of situations in the future? Personally, I've eaten an evening meal now with the family for every night for the last 6 weeks. That has never happened in my working life before, I think, certainly not in the last 20, 30 years. How's that going to change their expectations of their work-life balance? How are you going to have to adapt to that? How can you twist that into, I guess, a competitive advantage for you? What about the environment? We've all seen, obviously, less travel is good for the environment. Is that going to put any pressure on your business to adapt? Our staff can expect you to reduce your travel to be, I guess, more environmentally friendly as a result of this. New technology, AI, can it help your business? If you don't do it, will your competitors, will you lose a competitive advantage as a result? Just some examples of some questions that will be the sort of things we need to start to consider as we move into sort of the later stages of the recovery journey. Okay, so here we go. So I touched on those services earlier. You will all have received, certainly all been sent out through the newsletters that we've been sending out now on a weekly basis, and over the last couple of days directly from the team here. A services voucher. Some of those services I talked about a couple of slides back. They have a cost associated. and we'd like to, but inevitably, we can't just provide all those free of charge. But what we can do, and this voucher is here to help you, is to provide you with 90 days free service for that in these particular areas when you subscribe to the new service. Now, I won't go into the details now. You should have had the emails and the information, and we'll certainly be following up and discussions over the next couple of weeks with you as we speak with you. If you haven't seen that email or received your voucher, then get in contact after this, and we'll make sure that gets to you directly. And then really finally, just to make you aware, as I said, this is really the first in a series of webinars that we intend to put together on a weekly basis. Certainly for the foreseeable future, we'll probably reduce the frequency at some point when appropriate. But they are intended to help you move through that that 5-step journey. We are considering also maybe some sort of, I guess, guest webinars from our clients in areas that would help around I know, agile working, virtual events, for example, are a couple that we've been thinking of and talking to a couple of clients on. As we're at the moment, next week is going to be a focus on the Microsoft Teams, some of which you are using, and really about making it a safe place to collaborate. So we'll send out some details on that for the registration. But if there is anything in particular that's a challenge to yourself, an interest relevant to your business and the industry you work in, that would be a useful topic for us to cover, would love to hear from you, and really encourage you to just drop me an email after this, and we'll see where we can fit that into the schedule. The whole point of these webinars is really to sort of try and help and guide you through the coming months and year. So really, thank you for joining. That's the session. I'm a couple of minutes late, so I need to be better with my timing. So apologies for that. There's my email address there, graham.stead@ucmi.com, and my direct dial phone number, which will come through to mobile, desk phone, etc., wherever I am. Or of course, you've got your client services and your sort of solution sales contacts as well for each of your accounts. So I hope that was useful. Like I said, I will send out the links for the recording and everything, so you have this as a reference point in the future. And look forward to hopefully seeing you next week. And keep well, keep safe. Many thanks.